My golden child sister convinced my parents to cut ties with me after her divorce because I stayed friends with her husband, whom she had cheated on. Now, she wants me to pay for her new wedding. 3 years ago, my twin sister stopped talking to me and made our parents do the same for the most ridiculous reason you can imagine. For context, my sister, Emma, was in the middle of divorcing her husband, Kevin. Kevin happened to be a close friend of mine. We met in college and became best friends. Even though Kevin and I were close, Emma and I were not. We're twins, but she's 16 minutes younger than me and has always been treated like the baby of the family. As the golden child, our parents were softer on her and tougher on me. I guess it was because she was their only daughter. Naturally, this created some resentment on my part. Emma always got her way, was a bit spoiled, and wasn't exactly easy to get along with. I remember the first time Kevin saw a family photo on my social media that included Emma. He immediately asked me to introduce him to her because he was smitten. I initially refused, but after a few weeks of him not giving up, I talked to Emma about it. Despite our differences, Kevin was a good friend, so I didn't see any harm in introducing them. She agreed, and the two started dating in our first year of college. They were together for 6 years before getting engaged, and I was genuinely happy for them. Their relationship even made Emma somewhat tolerable to be around. When they got married, I was Kevin's best man, and I couldn't have been prouder. But after 2 years of marriage, everything fell apart. Emma cheated on Kevin with a coworker. Kevin found out when he went through her phone. When he confronted her, she admitted to being bored and claimed the affair meant nothing. She even offered to break it off and work on their marriage, but understandably, Kevin wasn't interested. He left her, and the divorce was ugly. What made it worse was Emma's audacity to demand alimony, even though she was the one who cheated and had a steady job. I sided with Kevin throughout the divorce because, frankly, Emma was in the wrong and we weren't close anyway. That didn't sit well with her. She complained to our parents saying I was disloyal and that as family, I should automatically be on her side. For some reason, my parents agreed. They called a family meeting where they told me to cut ties with Kevin because he had wronged Emma. I told them it was ridiculous. Kevin had been my friend for years, and I wouldn't abandon him just because Emma made bad choices. If Kevin had cheated, it would have been different, but Emma was the one in the wrong. Emma was furious. She accused me of sabotaging her divorce settlement and being jealous of her. I lost my patience and told her she didn't deserve anything because she had no morals or ethics. The argument got heated, and I left early. A few days later, my parents called and told me they were cutting me off because Emma had given them an ultimatum. Either they choose her or they lose her. Unsurprisingly, they chose her. They even told me I could fix this by cutting Kevin out of my life, but by that point it had become a matter of principle. I wished them well and stopped speaking to them. 3 years have passed since then. Kevin and I are still friends, but I haven't spoken to my family at all. I see them occasionally in passing, but we avoid each other. It hurts that my parents chose Emma over me, but I've come to terms with it. Recently, my parents decided to visit me. Their visit wasn't to apologize, unfortunately, but to ask for my help. I've recently started making a lot of money because my business has taken off. I own a restaurant, and after receiving a particularly glowing review from a very popular blogger, customers began pouring in. It's been an amazing few months since then. I guess my parents did the math and decided to reach out because they needed money. Interestingly, they didn't need the money for themselves. It was for Emma. Apparently, she's getting married again. I suppose she must have downplayed the seriousness of her relationship with her coworker, the one she had the affair with, because, as far as I know, that's the person she's marrying. They've been together since her divorce, and they got engaged a couple of months ago. I knew about it, but it's not like I was going to be invited to the wedding, so I didn't think much about it. About 4 days ago, my parents showed up at my door. I was pretty surprised to see them. They were being polite enough, so I invited them in. I didn't just shut the door in their faces because, first, I'm not that kind of person, and second, I made the mistake of assuming they were here to mend things with me and apologize. That was my mistake. After some small talk about my life and business, they got to the point. They told me Emma was getting married again and wanted to make it a grand event. She wanted people to forget about her first wedding and only remember this one. That sounded exactly like something Emma would do, so I wasn't surprised. Then they talked about the budget. They said the wedding was going to cost at least a staggering $50,000 to give Emma the luxurious event she wanted. That was shocking, considering we weren't a family that could afford something like that. My dad was a recently retired real estate agent, and my mom was a university history professor. Both of them earned decent money when they worked and had saved reasonably for their future. But spending $50,000 on a wedding was unthinkable. My parents told me the wedding was still several months away, so it wasn't like they needed the money immediately. They could afford to contribute some money from their retirement savings, but there was no way they could cover the full cost. The fiancé's family had already said they couldn't help, but my parents didn't want Emma to feel disappointed. So they had already committed to covering the entire wedding cost. That was before Emma started planning and shared the budget. Now, they didn't know what to tell her because there was no way they could pay for it without seriously affecting their retirement funds. They didn't want to let her down, so they were trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, they heard from a couple of people that my restaurant was doing well. They took it as a sign from the universe to visit me and talk about contributing to the wedding expenses. They told me this wedding meant everything to Emma. After her divorce from Kevin, she had to go to therapy because of how traumatizing the experience had been for her. Now, they said I had the chance to be a good brother for once and contribute to her wedding. The last time Emma asked me for something, I refused, and we didn't talk for 3 years. Now, they said, I had an opportunity to fix things by covering the wedding costs. To be honest, I thought they were joking. There was no way they could seriously believe I'd help. Even if I were a billionaire, I wouldn't have contributed a single cent to Emma's wedding. And I told them that. Of course, I said it after laughing in their faces because I couldn't believe they had the audacity to come to me after 3 years without even apologizing and act like I was the one in the wrong for cutting ties with them instead of with Kevin. Anyway, after laughing and refusing, I guess my parents were deeply offended. Instead of leaving, they started arguing with me. They said there was nothing funny about the situation and that Emma was right when she said I had no sense of family loyalty. Even now, when I was being presented with a golden opportunity to mend things with my sister, I was refusing to help. This time, my parents accused me of being jealous and insecure about my sister. They also said I was incredibly stingy. That really set me off. I could understand Emma saying those things. She's delusional and selfish, but my parents knew exactly what they had done. I completely lost it and told them they had no right to lecture me about family loyalty because they were the reason Emma and I didn't get along in the first place. I reminded them how they always treated Emma and me differently. They spoiled her excessively and expected me to put up with everything. I told them they had failed as parents, and that's why Emma had become a selfish monster who didn't even care about them. She thought it was perfectly fine to ask them to pay for such a lavish wedding. I added that it was their fault that even I, their son, wasn't willing to help them. Maybe they thought at least one of their children cared about them, but if Emma truly cared, she wouldn't have asked them to cover the cost of her wedding. She would have done the math and realized it was way beyond the budget of a moderately successful real estate agent and a teacher. She would have scaled down the wedding or figured out a way to pay for it herself. But she didn't care about any of that. She only cared about herself. As for me, I didn't feel the need to care about my parents either. It's not like they cared about me. At the end of the day, it was their own behavior that left them with 2 children who didn't bother thinking about them. They had no one to blame but themselves. After I said this, my mom started crying, and my dad cursed at me before leaving with her. In the moment, I didn't feel bad at all because I was so angry. But a few hours later, I got a text from my dad saying he was deeply disappointed in me. He claimed my words had broken his heart and my mom was in terrible shape because of me, so I need some opinions. Am I the bad guy for telling my parents that their 2 children don't care about them and that it's their own fault? Update 1. After reading the comments and speaking privately with some of you, it's clear I have nothing to feel guilty about. It's been a week since I spoke to them, and now I've blocked them. It's ironic that my dad unblocked me just to send that message, considering he hadn't bothered to check on me in 3 years. It only shows how selfish and insensitive they are. For the record, I don't care about their feelings because I truly don't. That's the truth. As for Kevin, yes, he knew Emma was getting married again. She posted about her engagement a couple of months ago, and that's when he found out. So, he's been aware for some time and is fine with it. Their divorce was really messy and awful for both of them. I guess the whole process helped him get over her, and now he has no feelings for her at all. He didn't date anyone for a while after the divorce, but last year he started seeing people again. He's doing well, and we try to catch up every couple of weekends. When I told Kevin about my parents' visit and their request for me to pay for Emma's second wedding, he said I did the right thing by refusing. We even laughed about how Emma apparently had to go to therapy after the divorce because she was so traumatized. According to what we remember, it was Emma who lied about Kevin to make him look like the villain during the divorce, just so she could get the alimony she wanted and justify her infidelity. I honestly don't understand why she needed therapy when she was the one traumatizing everyone else. Anyway, I've decided to keep my distance from my parents and stop talking to them again. That's the best thing for my mental health, and I hope they don't contact me again. I'd hate to have to get dragged back into this mess. Update 2. About 2 weeks ago, my parents paid me a visit, and that meeting didn't end well. Afterward, I blocked them and hoped they wouldn't contact me again. But today, they called me again. I assume they used a disposable phone because I didn't recognize the number. They called while I was working, and I was quite distracted. I ended up answering because I thought it might be an important call. As soon as I heard my dad's voice, I was about to hang up, but he said he was outside my restaurant and desperate to talk to me. He insisted on meeting for coffee, saying he couldn't leave without speaking to me. I tried to tell him I was busy at work and would be tied up for the next several hours, but he said he was willing to wait. He sounded desperate, and I felt a little worried. So, reluctantly, I agreed to meet him. Otherwise, he might have come into my restaurant and caused a scene. He didn't explicitly say that, but it felt like a possibility, and it was the last thing I wanted. After the call, I couldn't focus on work because I was so distracted and upset. I decided to take a break and went to meet him at the cafe nearby, as he'd mentioned. It wasn't far, so I walked there. When I saw him sitting inside, I approached him right away. I told him that what he was doing was completely unacceptable. I said he couldn't show up at my workplace and harass me because he wanted money. To my surprise, he said he wasn't there to talk about money. He wanted to talk about my mom. That caught me off guard. He explained that after our last conversation, my mom had completely broken down and hadn't been the same since. Even though 2 weeks had passed, she hadn't recovered and had become a shadow of her former self. He said there was only one thing that could help her: me visiting her and talking to her. My dad also seemed genuinely distressed, which put me in a very difficult position. I didn't want to hurt him intentionally, but at the same time, I didn't feel obligated to visit my mom. She hadn't bothered to reach out to me in the last 3 years, and our relationship had been terrible for a long time. After thinking it over, I told my dad I didn't have the time to go see her. Even if I agreed to visit, I didn't know what he expected me to say. It would be a lie to say I'd forgiven them, because I hadn't. I couldn't forgive them, especially since they'd never apologized. My dad became visibly upset when I said I wouldn't visit my mom. He said she was in an extremely bad emotional state because of what I had said last time about neither of their children caring about them. To be fair, my mom has always been very sensitive and emotionally fragile. It didn't take much to make her cry or hurt her feelings. Even when we were kids, everyone in the family knew we had to tread carefully when speaking to her. I agreed with him that my mom is a deeply sensitive person, but I'm also a sensitive person, and if she can't move past things, neither can I. I tried to explain this to my dad, but he insisted that I needed to put our differences aside for once and visit her because she had completely broken down. At one point, we were just going in circles. Finally, I firmly told him that I wasn't going to visit anyone, not until both of them apologized to me. Even then, I would need time to think it over. I reminded him that for the past 3 years they hadn't spoken to me, and before that they hadn't treated me well. Naturally, it had become very difficult for me to see them the same way I used to or to care about them. I told him I've built a life for myself without them, and they didn't seem to care about me until they needed something. Whether it was me or, more specifically, my money. I also mentioned how hurt I'd been when they cut me out of their lives, but that didn't seem to matter to them at the time. They hadn't reached out to me or checked on me afterward, even though I was deeply affected. Feeling hurt and frustrated, I told my dad I wouldn't visit my mom and that I was very busy. I warned him that if he harassed me at work again, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police. I also told him I didn't want them visiting me anywhere, not just at work. I made it clear I was serious and then left to return to my restaurant. I had a lot to take care of. I thought he might try something else later in the day, but fortunately, nothing happened. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm exhausted by all of this and regret ever letting them back into my life in the first place. Update 3, I'm back, but thankfully not because of my parents. Well, technically yes, but at least not directly. I still haven't had to speak with them. Before I get into the update, I want to address the person who said I should have called the police on my dad and accused me of being a pushover for not doing so. I guess you've never run a restaurant. If you had, you'd know it's terrible for business to have the police show up in the middle of service. If I hadn't agreed to meet him, he probably would have come inside and caused a scene, which would have been just as bad, if not worse. People pay to enjoy a peaceful dining experience, not to deal with someone shouting or to watch the police walk in. Anyway, moving on to the actual update. Even though I haven't had a good relationship with my immediate family for the past 3 years, I've managed to maintain a positive relationship with other relatives. Everyone knows we had a falling out years ago, and that we haven't been in contact since. They also know the reason why, but no one wanted to get involved in the drama, so they've stayed neutral. For events like weddings, birthdays, or parties, they've invited me and my parents separately. Recently, one of my cousins announced her pregnancy, and I noticed my parents hadn't been invited to the party. When I asked about it, she told me it wasn't because of me. Instead, she'd had a minor argument with my sister a few weeks before the party. This happened around the time my cousin posted her pregnancy announcement online. Apparently, Emma accused her of trying to steal the spotlight. Emma believed that my cousin had deliberately gotten pregnant to overshadow her wedding, which had taken place just a couple of months earlier. The accusation was so absurd that my cousin decided to cut ties with her altogether. She didn't want to deal with that kind of negativity while she was pregnant. And honestly, who can blame her? As a result, my cousin also decided not to invite my parents to the party. They had taken it upon themselves to contact her parents and accuse my cousin of being selfish and spoiled for making such a big deal about her pregnancy, knowing Emma's wedding was just a few months prior. Because of this, I was the only one in my family who was invited. My cousin knew I had nothing to do with their behavior, and she made it clear that the decision to exclude them was entirely based on their own actions, not mine. Still, my parents decided to blame me for it. They went online and made a public statement, claiming they had stayed silent about my jealous and insecure behavior toward Emma for a long time to protect my reputation. But now, since I had turned the family against them, they felt they had no choice but to speak out. They implied it was my fault that my cousin didn't invite them to the pregnancy announcement party. On top of that, they painted me as the villain for staying friends with Kevin, despite how he had ruined Emma's mental health during their divorce. Of course, they conveniently left out the fact that Emma had been cheating on Kevin the entire time. Why would they include that? In their post, they called me selfish, insecure, and a loser. They even said they were happy to no longer call me their son because they were going to disinherit me. I wish I could say I cared, but I really don't. Plenty of people sent me the post. Since I couldn't see it myself, I'm still blocked by them. I told everyone not to bother arguing with my family because it's clear they've lost all sense of reason. No one who actually matters will believe a word of what they said, so it's not doing any real damage to my reputation. Let them talk. I'm so far above all this nonsense. At the same time, I'm incredibly grateful for the relatives who have supported me. While they've stayed out of the drama so far, I'm confident they'll all steer clear of my parents and Emma from now on. Update 4. It's been a couple of months since my last update because honestly there wasn't much to talk about. After the statement my parents posted online blaming me for everything that had gone wrong, most of our extended family practically stopped talking to them. I'm sure my parents would have blamed me for that too, but at this point there was no use making more posts against me. The damage had already been done, and they had reached a point of no return. As for me, I was pretty happy without them in my life. And now, I'm even happier. Recently, I learned from a few relatives who are still in touch with my parents that Emma has apparently cut ties with them. My parents weren't present at her wedding, which took place a few weeks ago, raising a lot of questions. Some relatives decided to ask my parents what was going on. My parents told them they had informed Emma that her wedding budget was way beyond their means and that they couldn't afford it. This led to a huge fight because Emma was furious. They had promised to cover all the expenses, but were now going back on their word. My parents explained to her that they had made those promises assuming her plans would be within a reasonable budget. However, her plans were far too extravagant. They also needed to think about their own future, since they are now both retired. Emma didn't take this well. Being the spoiled child she is, she decided to cut them off entirely and make her fiancé and his family pay for the wedding. This forced her to significantly downsize the wedding to something much more modest. She ended up having the wedding without her parents present. Emma doesn't seem affected by any of this, but my parents are reportedly very upset. From what I've heard, they're extremely disappointed that neither of their children seems to care about them anymore. Which is fair because, as I said from the beginning, this is the reality they created for themselves. In any case, I'm doing well, so I don't care much about this. It just goes to show that you can't escape karma. It catches up to you eventually. That's exactly what happened to my parents, and soon enough it will catch up to Emma too. Honestly, I wish them luck. Update 5. I didn't think I'd have anything else to share, but life keeps throwing surprises my way. Here's the latest. First, about Emma. Karma isn't done with her yet. I recently heard from some relatives that Emma has been unfaithful to her new husband. From what I've been told, her husband and Emma no longer work together because he accepted a new job at a different company. This left Emma at her old workplace, and apparently, she wasted no time starting an affair with a new co-worker. I don't know the details, but I do know it's someone who recently joined the company. And keep in mind, it hasn't even been 2 years since her wedding. What I've heard is that Emma and her husband are going through a marital crisis. There hasn't been any talk of divorce yet, but things aren't looking good. Honestly, I'm surprised, but also not really, given how she behaved during her first marriage. All I can say is that I hope her husband is prepared for what's coming. If there's one thing I've learned about Emma, it's that she makes outrageous demands during divorces, and she already has experience. Maybe this is karma for him too, though I wouldn't wish Emma on my worst enemy. As for my parents, I've heard a few new things about them as well. Ever since Emma cut ties with them, things have only gone downhill. At first, they thought Emma would come back to them, especially after her new marriage began to show cracks. But that hasn't happened. Emma is still not speaking to them, and I've been told they're becoming increasingly depressed and isolated. Some relatives have tried to reach out to them, but my parents have rejected their help. I think they're starting to realize how their actions have affected the entire family, but they're not ready to admit it, or to change. Edit. Apparently, my sister is heading for her second divorce. At this rate, she might start collecting them.